Thank you, Ethan. Welcome, everybody. So a quick primer, right? GraphQL is a flexible API format, but it has more of a dynamic structure, which makes it a little bit more difficult to match and do stubbing and mocking with the core functionalities that you're used to in WireMock Cloud. While it is a JSON format over the wire, the way GraphQL queries can be structured and ordered led to some challenges in matching logic and in working with GraphQL. That is until now with the capabilities I'm about to show you. So the platform now supports mocking GraphQL queries. Important to note queries today as part of our beta right now, allowing you to simulate GraphQL behavior during your development and testing. So you can match GraphQL queries coming in and have responses go back with randomized data, a little bit of control on that randomized data I'll show you, or complete custom responses, even using dynamic response templating. And also this works with federated GraphQL setups as well. So I'll show a little bit about that. And we've included a special guest from our engineering here, team Rafe, to handle any questions that I might not be able to handle myself, as GraphQL is new and interesting to me, and I too am still learning about all of its capabilities and the products and the platform's capabilities around GraphQL. So let me get my screen shared here, and we'll start the capability inside of WireMock Cloud. We're going to start here at our Create New Mock API screen. So we'll come in here and we'll create a new mock API, and we're going to choose this fancy new GraphQL beta type here. Now you'll see you have your standard manual creation, recording creation, and the WireMock CLI. Today we're just going to focus on the manual creation of a GraphQL mock API. So as typical, we'll go ahead and we'll specify a name here. So we'll call this one WireMock Live. Let's choose this name that I have prepared here. Why not? And we'll click Continue. We'll then be brought into the GraphQL schema configuration screen. And here we'll need to supply a GraphQL schema, either by copying and pasting or typing it into the text box here, or choosing a GraphQL schema file that we have on our local system. I'm just going to go ahead and paste one in here from my smart clipboard, and we can see we have this GraphQL schema defining a user and how that query of a user can be made. So simply with this information, I can say save schema, and then we can come over into our stubs list and see that we have our GraphQL mock data stub created for us. There's no matching criteria on this query, so this should match every query that comes in to our endpoint. And then down below, we'll see our response body, nothing hard-coded, no dynamic response templating. We're simply going to rely on this data generation panel, and we'll play around with this in just a moment. So I'm going to take my endpoint here and copy that, and we're going to come over to the Apollo GraphQL sandbox, and I'll replace the endpoint that I was playing around with here previously with my new mock API endpoint. And we'll notice very quickly, I'm not sure if you've noticed that, but our fields have been auto-populated here based on the Apollo sandbox, reaching out to the mock API, understanding the schema and how it can be queried. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and delete my query there. I'll use my smart clipboard and put in a query against this endpoint. What's nice about the Apollo GraphQL sandbox is it's going to validate that through linting and ensure that this is a valid query against my mock API or my real GraphQL endpoint. And we can go ahead and execute this query, and we'll see I'm getting some data back on the side here. So we've got our users collection, and then we have 3 users coming back with some information populated, matching the structure that we asked for in our query, asking for the ID, the name, and the hobby of each user to be returned. Now, important to note, the way that we have this mock API configured right now is it's using random data generation. So every time I make a query against this mock API, you'll see that while I'm getting that structure back, the data is being randomly generated each time I make this query against my mock API. But more importantly, we're getting a valid response back per that schema. What we can do at this point is come back over into WireMock Cloud and take a look at that request log and see those post requests to the mock API being serviced. And we can take one of these by clicking on it. We can look at the information coming back, and then we can come down to the bottom, see that response, and say, well, I want to convert this to a stub. So we'll go ahead and we'll convert that to a stub, and we'll see that I now have an additional stub made here. And what I'm doing at this point is I am going to create a hard-coded or a response using dynamic response templating rather than relying on the random data generation. So I'm going to fix a response for this style of query at this point. So we'll come down in the response section here, and we can make a couple of edits. So maybe we'll go ahead and replace the name here to always be my name. And then we can have over here a different name, be Betty, boop. And then we can have name over here be Jack Jones. Okay, and we can save this. And we'll come back over into our GraphQL Apollo sandbox here, and we can hit execute on that example query as we've defined it here. And now we'll see that we have a fixed response coming back for this query, just as we've just asked WireMock Cloud to do. Now, if I go ahead and expand my query here and change my query slightly, so maybe I look inside of the users object here, and I decided that I also want to return a date of birth as part of the attributes coming back for each user. And now I execute this query. You'll notice that we are back to having that randomized data generated because now we're sending in a net new query to the WireMock Cloud mock API endpoint. And if we wanted to hard code this particular query to have a certain set of responses always coming back, we could take the same approach that we did before, coming back into WireMock Cloud, coming into the request log, finding that new query that we're sending that includes the date of birth in the query, and choose to convert that to a stub, therefore locking this style of query and the response coming back. Now, do note that dynamic response templating is enabled or can be enabled, and it is fully capable to use that inside of the response body. So if you wanted to use the data faker style of handlebar helpers or any of the others that are in the library, you have the flexibility to do that using dynamic response templating here. Okay. Let's now talk about another concept that I overlooked and didn't describe in the GraphQL schema configuration pane. So we talked about being able to copy and paste the schema or upload the schema, but you'll also notice the GraphQL federation down below here. GraphQL Federation allows us to combine multiple subgraphs, if they're called, other GraphQL endpoints, and create a superset or an overarching GraphQL endpoint that encompasses multiple other smaller endpoints in it. And WireMock Cloud has support for this right out of the gate with our initial beta release. So to set this up, I followed what we have in the documentation, which I'll show you in a moment or two, but I've already gone ahead and set up 3 different GraphQL endpoints, mock APIs, one for users, one for products, and one for reviews. I'll open one of these just to show you, we're just going to use the random data generation below here. And then we will, at the bottom of this, notice that if we come into the GraphQL schema screen, that we've enabled federation on these particular 3 endpoints that we're going to use in our supergraph. Now, what does a supergraph look like? I have one prepared for us to take a look real quick. I'm going to open up this file, this supergraph YAML file here. So we'll take a quick look at this. And we'll see that defining a supergraph is really quite easy. In this case, we've got the subgraphs listed as the users subgraph, the products subgraph, and the reviews subgraph. And each one of these, the schema is being pointed at the WireMock API endpoint that we've created, or that I had shown you for these three pieces. With that information, we can go ahead and use a tool like Rover. I'll just find my command here. Rover will take care of using this configuration file, this YAML file, to then build the super graph for us that blends together these subgraphs. It's telling me that my super graph is now running at this endpoint. So let's go ahead and run that inside of our browser here, or hit that inside of our browser. And much like we saw in the Apollo endpoint, we have a sandbox experience for us here as well. From here, it's listing, it's successfully reading what the schema information is and helping potentially build a query for us. So I can go ahead and execute this query. This query is going to be pulling information from all of three of those subgraphs in the users and the products and the reviews in order to generate this response that I'm asking for. List me all the products, give me the description of the product, the ID of the product, its UPC barcode, and then give me reviews that exist for that product. So I want the body of the review, and then I also want to know who is the user that left that review, right? So this is combining information from three separate endpoints all into one super graph, allowing us to query those three endpoints with a single query against this super graphed mock API endpoint encompassing all of those. And you'll see we're getting that randomized text back. Coming into our GraphQL reviews endpoint, we can just check in our request log that yes, we did get a sample response here. And we could take that same approach that I showed you earlier and taking this randomized data that's currently coming back and decide to convert this to a stub and replace this with more maybe human sensical information rather than this randomized generated data that's showing up. And that's the last thing I want to show you today is how do we override the behavior of the random information that's being generated. So I showed you how we could convert this into more of a hard-coded stub or then use dynamic response templating. But what I failed to show you when I created this WireMock Live GraphQL is how can we affect the random data generation that is occurring. So let's go ahead and get rid of these hard-coded ones that we created together here by converting them to stub. And let's just look at the base GraphQL mock data stub and take a quick exploration in the data generation section. So the capabilities inside of our functionality today for GraphQL allows us to choose a type of information coming back, being generated by our mock API, and start to override how it behaves. So let's go back over to our sandbox here and make a query against the example query users, ID, name, hobbies, and date of birth. And we can see that information is coming back randomized right now. Let's affect how this ID is being generated. Maybe our IDs need to be 6 characters long and should not include numbers. They should only be letters. We have that fidelity in the random data generation scheme here. So we can say for any ID that needs to be returned per the schema, let's go ahead and affect how that's going to be sent back in a randomized form. So we can choose from fixing that as a fixed value. We can choose the minimum and maximum length. So my requirement was that it needs to be 6 characters long. So minimum of 6 and a maximum length of 6. And then what pattern do we want these IDs to reflect? And I'm just going to copy this example in here. These lightly shaded colors here are just example placeholders for us. And when we actually override it with the value, you'll notice it turns a little bit darker of a black color. So I've set up this pattern saying that I just want it to be characters between A and Z. It could be multiple characters, but I've also said that it needs to be 6 characters via the min length and the max length. So I can save this here now, coming back into my sandbox and exercising this mock API. When I hit the example query button, you'll notice that the IDs coming back now follow those rules that I've set as part of that data generator stub that's put there automatically for us. We're seeing 6 characters only, no integers coming back every time that data is generated for us. So with that, that's what I wanted to show you today. Of course, there's the documentation. You'll find that at our docs.wiremock.io/GraphQL. We've got 2 separate pages here for you with some detailed examples of how to get going, even the example queries that I showed you today in schema file, and how you can make this work, including the federation example, which was the example I walked you through today, in using Rover to publish that supergraph serving our 3 smaller mock API GraphQL endpoints in users, products, and reviews. With that, I will ask our MC, Ethan, here, if we have any questions that either myself or Rafe could get answers for.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Dan. We do have a few questions. As a reminder, we got some time left. So if you didn't drop your questions into the Q&A in Zoom yet, please do so. We did have one question asking to share the schema in chat so people could follow along, and Rafe jumped in and did that. So just want to point out, if you're looking for that schema, you can jump into the Q&A and you will see it there. One question we got here is, if you're familiar with or you're already using like the REST functionality in WireMock Cloud, what are some of the key differences I should expect or know about between existing protocols and GraphQL?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we sort of pull back and put the screen back up here, one, you'll notice, you're right, with just in the product experience itself, you're going to be configuring, and you will need to provide a GraphQL schema. So it's schema first in a GraphQL world. We need to set up this information so that a lot of these tools, whether they are something like the Apollo style of sandbox, or even the various libraries that exist out there for making GraphQL calls, will need this schema to exist so that it can do its type sensing and understanding how to make calls against that endpoint. So it will be a schema first approach. You'll notice things look a lot like JSON in a lot of areas with GraphQL. I even mentioned a little bit earlier that if we look at the requests coming in over the wire, they will look a lot like JSON. In fact, we do have customers that were successfully virtualizing GraphQL endpoints using just the unstructured or blank style of mock API template. But where something like that would fall down is, you'll notice that you see some new line characters coming in on the request. When you saw me building the queries here, ID, name, and hobbies, right? Those can come in any order inside of a GraphQL request and still be a valid request. And WireMock Cloud, with its GraphQL capabilities, now understand some of those finer grained complexities and flexibility in the GraphQL protocol. So if I were to create, this as let's go ahead and just do this real quick. We can go ahead and convert this one to a stub. We now should have this baked in as a constant. Now, what you might not expect is, if I take that date of birth and actually ask for it to come in the response after the ID, right? I still get the same response from WireMock, even though we've changed the structure of the query. And what I showed you earlier by adding date of birth or removing date of birth caused the random stub generator to come back, or data generator stub to come back. WireMock is smart enough to understand that simply changing where date of birth comes in the response, where the requester is asking that to be returned, doesn't necessarily have to change the response coming back. Now, you will notice that the response here, date of birth, is not actually coming back after the ID. That probably won't break your consuming logic, but this is one of those small complexities that in the GraphQL schema, without being able to handle this style, or knowing that these can come in different orders and still be a valid query against our matching logic, are some of the things that we're solving for with GraphQL. I'd be interested to hear, Rafe, if you had a different opinion or anything additional to add to that question on, what they might want to look out for differencing between GraphQL and REST or SOAP based virtualization.
Sure thing. Hey guys, I'm Rafe, one of the engineers at WireMock. Yeah, I think you covered it pretty well there, Dan. I think most of the capabilities we're adding on top of the existing stuff that's specific to GraphQL is just the knowledge around the schema that you provide and the capabilities there. So, yeah, like Dan was saying, we can sort of semantically understand what a query looks like. So if fields are out of order, we can still consider that the same query because it's semantically the same, even though it's not syntactically the same. And then the same kind of knowledge applies with the data generation stub that you get by default in a GraphQL mock API that Dan demoed earlier, where the data generation will understand what kind of types each field needs to be and will be able to generate data that's appropriate for that type, because it has knowledge of the schema that you upload.
Awesome. Cool. We got a little more time, so I'll sneak this question in. So Apollo has come up a couple times. We've talked about Apollo. Is there just anything folks using Apollo should know about also working with GraphQL and WireMock Cloud? That can be for either of y'all.
So I'm not super familiar with Apollo's tooling. Like I say, we're generally a REST first product at the moment, so we're still getting to grips with all the other tooling out there in the GraphQL ecosystem. Most of the stuff we've been working with is the federation stuff, which Dan's already demonstrated. We'd be really keen if anyone has other experience within the Apollo product space to learn more about their experience with it and how they integrate with the stuff we've released already.
Great. Yeah, I think that really highlights something, right? This is new for the GraphQL ecosystem as a whole, like Dan was touching on earlier. And some of these questions, we're still finding our way through. What is the best practice going to look like? What is the best pattern going to look like? And that's where, like I said earlier, we'd love to get you on a call and talk to you as we build out the next steps of this. Some things like REST, sort of mocking exists in the world, and we're happy to do the best version of it. But there's some reference points. This is pretty new if you're using GraphQL, so we can all pioneer this together. One thing I did want to ask about is there's this concept of mutations in GraphQL, and it might be worth talking about what I might need to know about the current state of GraphQL functionality in WireMock Cloud as it relates to that GraphQL concept.
Yeah, good question, Ethan. I mentioned a little bit earlier, right, in introducing our topic for today, in the capability that our GraphQL functionality today supports the querying of GraphQL endpoints, meaning retrieving of information and not actually updating or deleting, right, those other style of CRUD activities, right? So mutations typically mean something is changing. We're affecting the endpoint in some way by updating or deleting. And today, we do not have support for those mutations yet inside of GraphQL. It is query only.
But that is worth noting that that's a place we very logically would be looking at next, the best way to handle it. So that's another example of the kind of thing that if you want to get in touch, we would love to talk to you about it.
Just to add on top of that as well. So in terms of the actual query matching stuff, mutations will match against our query matches as well. So there's nothing stopping you from sending mutation requests to your WireMock GraphQL mock API. we just haven't added anything GraphQL specific on top of the existing functionality to handle those. But you can still use the existing state functionality to actually mutate state in the mock API and then put it into further requests, query requests or other mutation requests later down the line.
I think
Excellent.
most of the
See,
advanced
like I said, I don't know have all the answers yet.
I think most of the advanced capabilities like state you will find already are supported the same way you're used to in other WireMock Cloud protocols, with the exception of chaos in the current version of the beta is not native for GraphQL at this point. But some of the things that WireMock Cloud already does to provide like actual virtualization beyond just basic mocking, you'll see those just fine in GraphQL. And with that, it looks like we're at about time. I want to thank you all for joining today. Like I said, please reach out. We can take more questions. This is a monthly series, so we'll be back in about a month with a new topic. And if you'd like to distribute this across your team internally, see if any folks using or considering GraphQL have thoughts or want to give it a try. This is all out there in the product today. You can go sign up for free, try it out, and you can send them the recording to help them ramp up as well. So with that said, we'll let you go and hopefully you all have a great rest of your day.